The sky over Terra Nova 7 was a soft peach color. Jinwoo wiped sweat from his forehead. He placed another sensor spike into the red dirt. A gentle wind moved through the tall, purple grass. It was a quiet afternoon like many before. "Readings are good here," he said, more to himself than anyone. "The ironwood roots go deep. They are stabilizing the ridge perfectly." His partner, Myri, was a little way down the slope. She was watching a small creature with 6 legs. It was nibbling on a blue leaf. Her data pad hummed softly as it recorded the creature's behavior. "The Jujiak worms are active today," she called up to him. "Their tunnels are everywhere. It is a healthy sign for the soil." Jinwoo smiled. He liked this work. He liked the quiet of the land. It was very different from the crowded cities of his youth. Here he could understand things. Rocks, water, trees. They followed rules he could learn. He looked out over the valley. In the distance, he could see the faint shimmer of Haven Settlement's main dome. It looked small and peaceful from here. Their home. A sharp beep came from his wrist device. Then another. He frowned. The screen flickered. The words "signal lost" flashed in red. He tapped it. "Myri, is your link to the colony net working?" She looked at her own pad. The screen was dark. "No." It just went dead. "A solar flare, maybe?" Before Jinwoo could answer, a shadow passed over them. It was fast and silent. They both looked up. The peach sky was empty. No clouds. No chips. The wind had also stopped. The silence was suddenly heavy and wrong. Then the animals began to act strangely. A flock of high-end eagles burst from the ironwood forest below. They did not soar. They flew in frantic, crashing circles, crying out in sharp, scared sounds. From the grass, a family of furry toka creatures ran past Jinwoo's boots. They did not look at him. They just ran, blind with panic. "What is frightening them?" Myri asked. Her voice was low and tense. Jinwoo felt a deep, low vibration through the soles of his boots. It was not like an earthquake. It was a steady, unpleasant hum. It made his teeth feel strange. "Come on," he said. "We should get to the high ground. See what is happening." They packed their tools quickly and started to climb the rocky hill behind them. The animal panic grew worse. Insects swarmed around them. Small rodents scrambled over rocks. Every living thing was moving away from the northern pole. At the top of the hill, they had a clear view north. What they saw made them freeze. The air above the distant polar ice caps shimmered like a heat haze. Then, dark shapes fell from the sky. They were not ships like Jinwoo had ever seen. They looked like huge, black seeds or teardrops. They made no sound as they fell. They did not slow down with fire or engines. They simply plunged, one after another, straight into the ice. A moment later, the horizon swallowed the sun. A wave of darkness, quick and silent, raced across the land from the north. It was not a cloud. It was everything going offline. The lights on their equipment died completely. The distant shimmer of Haven's dome vanished. The world was plunged into the deep, natural twilight of the setting sun, but it felt infinitely darker. "That was not a solar flare," Jinwoo whispered. They waited, watching. For a long time, nothing happened. The strange vibration in the ground faded. The animals settled into a terrified quiet. Maybe it was over. Maybe it was some strange natural disaster. Then, from the edge of the ironwood forest at the base of their hill, the trees began to fall. Not fall. They were dissolving. Jinwoo grabbed his binoculars. They were simple, non-electronic ones. He was glad for them now. He focused on the forest edge. A creature was there. It was taller than 2 men. It had a shell that was black and shiny like oil. It stood on 4 jointed legs. From its front, 6 smaller limbs moved with a terrible, precise speed. 2 of these limbs ended in sharp points. They plunged into the thick trunk of an ancient ironwood tree. A pale green light glowed where the points entered the bark. The light spread in a web through the tree, from its roots to its highest branches. Then, before Jinwoo's eyes, the solid wood began to soften, turn to a bubbling, gray liquid. The tree lost its shape. It slumped into a steaming pool. The creature's other limbs held a sack-like container. It pushed this container into the pool of liquid tree. The sack pulsed as it sucked the material inside. In less than a minute, a tree that had stood for 300 years was gone. Only a chemical-smelling stain on the ground remained. The creature took a precise step to the right. It repeated the process on the next tree. It was not angry. It was not violent. It was efficient. It was like watching a person pick apples from a tree. A simple, mindless harvest. What is it doing? Myri breathed, her face pale. She had her own binoculars pressed to her eyes. It is not just cutting. It is processing. It is taking the raw materials, the complex organic compounds. Jinwoo watched it move to a third tree. His heart was pounding in his chest. This was not an attack on people. This was something worse. This was an attack on the world itself, on the very stuff it was made of. It is not here for us, he said, his voice hard. We are just in the way. It is here for everything else. The trees, the water. It is eating the planet. As they watched, a second creature emerged from the forest. Then a third. They moved in a perfect line, 20 meters apart. They did not communicate. They did not look at each other. They just worked. A factory line of consumption. Walking on the land. A terrible understanding settled in Jinwoo's stomach. This was an invasion, but not of soldiers and war. This was an invasion of locusts, of a hunger so vast it did not even see humans as a thing to fight. They were just another form of chaos, to be cleaned up later. The sun dipped fully below the horizon. The black harvesters continued their work in the gloom, their pale green chemical light the only thing breaking the darkness. The quiet was back, but now it was the quiet of a grave. Jinwoo lowered his binoculars. He looked at Myri. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the distant, sickly green glow. They were no longer geologists or scientists on a survey. They were prey, hiding on a hill, watching the butchers arrive. The walk back to Haven Settlement took all night. Jinwoo and Myri moved through the darkness without using lights. The green glow from the northern forests was light enough to see by, but it was a wrong light. It made the familiar landscape look like a bad dream. They heard the harvesters often. The low hum, the soft hiss of a tree dissolving, the occasional crash as a dead tree that was not fully processed fell over. The smell followed them too. A sharp, chemical smell like cleaning fluid and burned sugar. It killed the natural smells of earth and plants. They finally saw the dim shape of Haven's main dome just as the real sun began to rise. The dome was dark. No lights shone from within. The communication tower on top was still. It was like looking at a dead animal. The main gate was closed. A small crowd of people was gathered outside, their faces pale and tired. A man named Taehyun saw them first. He ran over. His clothes were stained with grease and his hands were dirty. Jinwoo, Myri, you are okay, he said. His voice was full of relief. We thought you were lost when the network died. What happened here? Myri asked, looking past him at the silent dome. Everything died, Taehyun said, leading them towards a small side door that was being held open. One moment, everything was working. The next, all power went out. Primary, secondary, even the backup batteries. It was not a failure. It was like something reached in and turned it off. Inside, the dome was lit by emergency glow sticks and lanterns. The air was warm and still without the circulators running. People sat in small groups, talking in low, worried voices. Children cried softly. They found Sujin near the control center. She was not sitting. She was standing over a table with a paper map of the colony. She was marking it with a pencil. She looked up as they approached. Her face was calm, but her eyes were moving quickly, taking in everything. You saw something, she said. It was not a question. Jinwoo told her. He told her about the black seeds falling into the pole. He told her about the harvesters and the trees. He described the terrible efficiency of it. Sujin listened without saying a word. Her pencil stopped moving on the map. They are targeting infrastructure, she said when he finished. But not like an army would. An army bombs a power plant. These things, they are taking it apart. They are collecting the materials. Leader Kim Suk joined them. He was an older man who had helped plan Haven. He looked very tired. We must try to talk to them, he said. There must be a misunderstanding. We are not a threat. Taehyun shook his head. Sir, my short-range radio is the only thing that works, and I am only getting that weird buzz. It is not a signal. It is like noise, but a thinking noise. We must try, Suk insisted. Prepare a broadcast on all old-fashioned frequencies, a message of peace. Sujin nodded, but she did not look hopeful. She went back to her map. Jinwoo and Myri found some water and a little food. They sat against a wall, too tired to sleep. They watched the colony leaders work. An hour later, Taehyun had a small transmitter working. It was powered by a hand crank. Leader Suk spoke into the microphone. His voice was clear and calm. He welcomed the visitors. He offered to share scientific data. He asked for a meeting. They played the message over and over, sending it out into the silent air. For a long time, nothing happened. People began to hope. Maybe the harvesters were just machines. Maybe the real aliens would hear them and come to talk. Then, Taehyun's face went white. He was listening to a small speaker. Something is answering. He whispered. A sound came from the speaker. It was the buzz they had heard before. But now it was stronger. It was not a random noise. It had a pattern. The buzz rose and fell, pulsed. It was a language, but not made for human ears or minds. A computer nearby, which had been dead, suddenly flickered to life. The screen was filled with scrolling symbols that looked like jagged cracks. Then, a single line of translated text appeared on the screen. The translation software was working, but it had not been activated by anyone. The text read, "You are chaos. You will be ordered." The screen went black. The computer died again, this time with a small puff of smoke. Before anyone could speak, a shout came from the dome's observation deck. Movement! At the perimeter! At the southern solar farm! Everyone rushed to the viewports. Far in the distance, at the edge of the vast field of solar panels, black shapes were moving. Not the four-legged harvesters. These were different. They were taller, thinner. They moved on two legs with a swift, scuttling gait. They carried no harvest sacks. Their limbs ended in sharp, precise tools. They did not attack the fence. They simply touched it, and the metal posts dissolved into slurry, which they ignored. They walked through the gap. They went straight to the nearest solar panel array. Two of them placed their tool limbs on the support structure. The green light glowed. The metal beams softened and fell. The glass and silicon panels crashed to the ground and shattered. Other creatures caught the falling panels. They did not harvest them. They just moved them aside, clearing the area. It was not consumption this time. It was disassembly. Clearing the chaos of human construction. A young man, an engineer, cried out, "That is our primary power. Stop them." He and a few others ran for the door, grabbing tools to use as weapons. "Wait! Do not go out!" Leader Suk shouted. But it was too late. The small group ran out into the morning light. The black creatures did not turn to fight. They continued their work. One of the men ran up to a creature and swung a metal pipe at its leg. The pipe hit the shiny shell with a loud clang. The creature did not react. It did not look at the man. Another limb, which had been working on a support beam, swung back in a motion too fast to see. The pointed end pierced the man's chest. Pulled back. The man fell. The creature did not pause. It stepped over his body and continued disassembling the next solar panel. From the dome, everyone watched in total silence. The attack had not been angry. It had not been a fight. It was the same as a person brushing a fly off their arm without looking. A minor distraction, removed. The message was now very clear. The broadcast was understood. They were chaos, and they were being ordered, not through war but through erasure, one piece at a time. The mood in Haven Settlement changed after the solar farm. Before, there was confusion and fear. Now there was a cold, quiet horror. The people had seen that the invaders did not hate them. They were simply not important enough to hate. They were in the way, like weeds. Leader Kim Suk called a meeting in the dimly lit community hall. The air was thick and warm. People sat on the floor, their faces lit by flickering lantern light. "We cannot fight them head-on," Suk said, his voice trying to sound strong. "Our weapons are useless. Our energy is gone. But we are not without resources. We have our minds. We have our knowledge of this world." A man stood up. "What knowledge? They are eating the world itself. What can we do? Throw rocks at them." "We can hide," a woman said. "We can go deep into the caves to the east. Wait them out." Sujin stood up. She had been quiet until now. "They are not a storm that will pass," she said. Her calm voice cut through the noise. "They are a factory. They will not leave until this planet is a bare rock. Hiding is just waiting to die." "Then what do you suggest, engineer?" the first man asked, his arms crossed. "We study them," Myri said, speaking from where she sat beside Jin Woo. Her voice was softer than Sujin's, but clear. "I am an exobiologist. Every creature has a purpose, a behavior, a weakness. They move as one. They think as one. That is their strength. But maybe it is also a problem." Taehyun nodded excitedly. "The buzz, their communication. It is like a network. Always there. Always the same. I have been listening to it on my old receiver. It never stops. It never changes tone." The meeting turned into a planning session. It was decided. They would not attack. They would observe. They would try to understand the rhythm of the enemy. For the next 2 days, small teams went out. They watched from ridges and hid in gullies. They saw that the Kel, a name Taehyun made up from the sound of their buzz, worked in perfect shifts. Harvesters harvested. Disassemblers took apart human things. Smaller, faster scouts moved ahead, scanning. They never rested. They never seemed to sleep. They also learned the Kel ignored certain things. They did not touch natural water sources unless they needed to cross them. They walked around large, unstable rock formations. They avoided areas with very high, sharp cliffs. They were efficient, not reckless. "They are assessing risk," Sujin noted, looking at the reports. "Like a good engineer, they will not waste energy on a dangerous climb if they can go around. They are logical." This gave them a small, desperate idea. A plan formed. The main Kel force was moving toward the colony's central hydroponics bay. This was where most of their food was grown. If the Kel took it apart, starvation would follow quickly. "We don't defend it," Sujin said. "We use it. We lead them into a trap." Her plan was clever. The hydroponics bay was built against a tall, unstable cliff face. The support structures on that side were weak. It was a known problem they had meant to fix. Sujin proposed they weaken it further in a controlled way. They would lure a group of Kel inside. Then they would collapse the cliff onto them. It was dangerous. It required timing. But it was the first real plan they had. On the morning of the third day, they set their trap. A team, including Jinwoo and a few others, used manual tools to carefully weaken the crucial supports inside the bay. It was nerve-wracking work. Every sound seemed too loud. Another group, led by leader Suk himself, was to be the bait. They would show themselves at the main entrance, drawing the Kel's attention. Then they would run inside, leading the creatures into the targeted area. Jinwoo and his team finished their work and hid in a small service trench outside. They waited. Their hearts pounded. They saw Suk and his group. They stood in the open, waving their arms. A unit of 6 Kel disassemblers turned. They scuttled toward the humans, fast and direct. Suk and his people ran inside the bay as planned. The Kel followed. It was working. Sujin, watching from a farther ridge with a clear view of the cliff face, gave the signal. A person hidden above the cliff began hammering a final support spike loose. Then, everything went wrong. The Kel inside the bay did not chase the humans deep into the trap. They stopped just inside the entrance. One of them looked up, pointed a limb at the ceiling supports. His tool glowed green. It was not attacking the people. It was analyzing the structure. It saw the weakness. A different, faster Kell unit, one they had not seen before, shot out from behind a nearby storage shed. It moved straight for the cliff face, right where the person was hammering. It scaled the rock in seconds. From the trench, Jinwoo heard a short, human scream. Then silence. The Kell on the cliff had not killed the person. It had simply removed them. The person was gone. Inside the bay, the Kell turned around and walked back out. They ignored Leader Suk, who was now shouting at them in anger and frustration. They just left. The trap had been seen, understood, and neutralized in less than a minute. The colonists felt a deep despair. The Kell were not just strong. They were smart. Their single mind shared information instantly. A weakness seen by one was known by all. Worse was to come. As the Kell unit retreated from the hydroponics bay, Leader Suk, in a fit of rage and grief, ran after them. He picked up a rock and threw it. It bounced off a Kell's shell. The creature stopped, turned. For the first time, a human had its full attention. Two of the smaller, faster Kell darted forward. They did not strike to kill. Their limbs moved in a blur, pinning Suk's arms. A third approached. A strange appendage, like a crystal spike, extended from its chest. It touched Suk's forehead. Suk's body went rigid. His eyes flew open. A terrible sound came from his mouth. Not a scream, but a raw, guttural sound of pure pain. His back arched. A video feed from a security camera, which had its own battery, was still broadcasting to a screen in the control trench. Everyone saw it. They saw Suk's face twist. They saw his eyes roll back. The Kell spike glowed with a cold blue light. It was not reading his mind. It was smashing through it, looking for data, maps, numbers, plans. It was a psychic wrecking ball. The process took 30 seconds. Then the Kell retracted the spike. They released Suk. He did not fall dead. He dropped to his knees. He was breathing, but his eyes were empty. A line of drool fell from his open mouth. He made a soft, humming noise. He was there, but he was gone. The person who was Kim Suk had been erased. Only a living body remained. The Kell turned and moved away, continuing their work. They had not killed their attacker. They had ordered him. They had turned chaotic, individual human thought into silent, obedient noise. In the trench, Jinwoo felt sick. Myri was crying silently beside him. On the screen, the empty shell of their leader knelt in the dirt, humming a tuneless song. They had tried to fight with cleverness. The enemy had shown them a new kind of terror. They did not take lives. They took souls. And they had just begun. The days that followed were the darkest. Leader Kim Suk was brought back to the dome. He sat where they placed him. He ate if food was put in his hand. He drank if a cup was brought to his lips. But he did not speak. His eyes never focused on anything. The low, tuneless hum never left his throat. He was a living ghost, and his presence sucked the hope from the room. People stopped talking about plans. They moved like shadows. They ate the remaining food without tasting it. The Kell continued their work. The hum of their psychic network was a constant background noise now, felt more than heard. It was the sound of the world being taken apart. Jinwoo found Myri sitting in a corner of the biology lab. She was not crying anymore. She just stared at a small, sealed container. Inside was a sample of Terra Nova 7 soil, teeming with tiny, worm-like Jujiok. They were normally busy creatures, always digging, always moving. Now they were curled up in tight balls, unmoving. "They are not dead," Myri said, her voice flat. "They are hiding. They feel the wrongness in the ground. The planet itself is in pain." Jinwoo sat beside her. He had no words of comfort. All his life, he had solved problems by understanding the land. He could read the history of the world in the layers of rock. But this was a history being erased before he could read it. "My grandfather," Jinwoo said quietly, not looking at her. "He was a fisherman. On the old world, the sea could be violent. Storms would come that could smash boats into pieces." Myri looked at him, her eyes empty. "What did he do?" "He did not fight the storm," Jinwoo said. "He could not. He learned to listen to it. He said the sea, the wind, the sky, they all had a rhythm, a song. A smart sailor does not sing his own song louder. He finds the cracks in the storm's song. He finds the quiet place where the waves are not so high. He paused, watching the still worms. These Kel, they have a song. That buzz. It is all one note. Perfect. Never changing. In the main hall, Taehyun was obsessively listening to his receiver. The buzz came through steady and strong. It is like a machine, he muttered to Sujin, who was looking at structural diagrams. No joy, no fear, no anger. Just on. Always on. Sujin did not look up. A machine can break if you find the right pressure point. But it's not one machine, Taehyun argued. It's a million, all thinking the same thing at the same time. How do you break that? Jinwoo's words about his grandfather echoed in his own head. Find the cracks in the storm's song. He stood up suddenly. His movement was sharp in the quiet room. Myri flinched. Their strength is their sameness, Jinwoo said, his voice stronger now. They are all one thing, one mind. What if we don't try to be one thing back? What if we stop trying to be an army or a colony? Sujin finally looked up from her diagrams. What should we be? Chaos, Jinwoo said. The word hung in the air. Real chaos, not their idea of it. We have to become something their one mind cannot understand. We have to be unpredictable, illogical. We have to be like the storm my grandfather feared. He walked over to Taehyun's radio. You can make this send sounds, right? Not just receive. Taehyun nodded. Yes, I can hook it to a power source, make a loudspeaker. But what do we send? A warning? A scream? No, Jinwoo said. Send their own buzz back at them. But wrong. Change it. Make it stutter. Sheep. Then, in the middle of it, add something else. The sound of the Haiyan eagle's distress cry. The sound of rocks falling. Taehyun's eyes began to light up. Jamming the signal, creating noise in their network. Sujin stood up, her engineering mind clicking into gear. We do the same with the land. We don't build traps. They see traps. We create accidents. Problems with no purpose. We redirect a small river to flood an area they are harvesting. Not to drown them, but to make the ground mud. To slow them down. To be an annoyance they must spend time thinking about. Myri uncurled from her corner. A faint spark was back in her eyes. The spores from the greycap fungus. They make creatures dizzy. They are not poison. They just confuse. We could spread them where they scout. The ideas began to flow, fast and desperate. They were not plans of war. They were plans of mischief, of irritation. They were the acts of a small, clever animal trying to survive a much larger, stupider predator. That a man listening nearby frowned. This is not fighting. This is throwing sand in their eyes. It is childish. Jinwoo turned to him. Yes, it is. A child is unpredictable. A child does not fight fair. The Kel understand logic. They understand order. Do you think they understand frustration? They looked at the broken form of Kim Suk, humming in the corner. The memory of his empty eyes was fresh. Trying to fight logic with logic had broken him. Sujin nodded slowly. We cannot beat their network, so we must infect it. We must be a sickness in their perfect, ordered mind. We will not give them a target. We will give them 1,000 tiny, buzzing flies. For the first time in days, something shifted in the room. It was not hope. It was darker, sharper. It was the feeling of baring teeth. It was the decision to stop being prey and to start being a pest. A very, very angry pest. The goal was no longer to win a battle. It was to become so strange, so annoying, so utterly chaotic that the orderly mind of the Kel would look at them and, for the first time, not see something to be ordered, but see something it wanted to get away from. They had found their new purpose. They would not be soldiers. They would be the storm. The new plan did not start with a bang. It started with Taehyun and a broken speaker. He found an old public address speaker in a storage shed. It was meant for colony announcements. He hooked it to a battery he had saved and connected it to his modified receiver. He didn't try to hide it. He placed it on a rock near the eastern tree line, where a group of Kel harvesters worked on the ironwoods. Jinwoo and Myri watched from a higher ridge, hidden by graycap fungus stalks. "Ready?" Jinwoo whispered into a handheld radio. "Ready?" Taehyun's voice crackled back. First, Taehyun played the Kel's own buzz. The low, rhythmic pulse filled the air. The harvesters did not react. It was their own sound. Then, Taehyun scratched a wire. The buzz stuttered, hiccuped, and dropped in pitch for a second. It sounded like a record skipping. All 4 harvesters stopped. They stood perfectly still. It was the first time Jinwoo had seen them pause their work. Taehyun then played a recording. It was the ultrasonic distress cry of a Jujiok worm, sped up until it was a painful, sharp shriek to human ears. He mixed it with the sound of falling rocks and the low growl of a large, angry predator that didn't even exist on Terra Nova 7. The harvesters turned towards the speaker. They did not attack it. They seemed confused. One took a step toward it. Another took a step back. Their perfect, synchronized line was broken. For a full minute, they just stood there, as if their network was trying to understand this meaningless, chaotic noise. Then, they turned away from the speaker and went back to work. But they did not return to their neat line. They bumped into each other. Their movements were slower, less precise. The noise had not hurt them. It had given their single mind a puzzle with no answer, and it had briefly jammed their rhythm. It worked, Myri breathed, a fierce smile touching her lips for the first time in days. It confused them. Meanwhile, Sujin worked on a bigger project. A Kel disassembly team was moving toward the main water filtration plant. It was a crucial target. Sujin did not try to defend it. She sabotaged it first. With a small team, she opened key valves, redirecting the pressurized water flow into a muddy field the Kel had just crossed. The field turned into a deep, sticky bog. The disassemblers, following their logical path, marched right into it. Their heavy, chitinous legs sank into the mud. They were not built for it. They tried to move forward, but their movements became slow and clumsy. They were not stuck, but they were slowed from a swift scuttle to a labored, trudging pull. They had to waste time and energy simply moving. Sujin's team then collapsed a small, unused storage shed into the only clear path around the bog. It was not a dangerous collapse. It was just a pile of rubble, an inconvenience. The Kel unit now had to either struggle through the mud or spend time clearing the rubble. Their perfect efficiency hit a snag. Next, it was Myri's turn. She had collected baskets of graycap fungus spores. They were fine purple dust. She and Jinwoo waited for a change in the wind. When the breeze began to blow towards a Kel scouting party moving along a canyon edge, they put on masks and threw the spores into the air. The purple cloud drifted down the canyon. The scouts walked through it. The spores were not toxic. They were psychoactive. They caused dizziness and disorientation in most species. The scouts did not fall over, but their straight, purposeful walk became a wavering line. One walked into a rock wall. Another stopped and turned in a slow circle. Their coordination was off. The shared mind was receiving conflicting, fuzzy data from their senses. It took them an hour to clear a canyon that should have taken 10 minutes. The colonists did not celebrate. They moved quickly to the next act of chaos. They started small fires in areas of dry grass behind the Kel advance. The fires did not threaten the invaders. They just created smoke, thick, black, and directionless smoke that blew across their sensors and obscured their vision. They loosened rocks on slopes above harvesting paths, causing small, constant landslides that blocked routes and buried nothing of value except time. They used mirrors to flash bright, random lights at the disassemblers working on the communication tower ruins. The lights did no damage. They were just startling, unpredictable glares in their visual sensors. For 2 days, this was the war. A war of whispers and ticks. A war of mud, noise, and confusion. The Kel did not retreat, but their flawless advance began to show seams. Units that were meant to meet at specific times were delayed. Harvesters sometimes paused for long minutes, as if the hive mind was processing too much useless data. Scouts sent back reports of false dangers, a cliff that was not unstable, a river that was not deep, because the humans had tricked their scanning tools. The humans were no longer targets. They were a buzzing, flickering, illogical problem. A problem that could not be solved by simply disassembling a structure or pacifying a single mind. Jinwoo stood with Taehyun on a hill at dusk. Below, they could see a Kel unit trying to cross a field. The humans had dug dozens of small, narrow holes the night before. The holes were not traps. They were just deep enough for a Kel leg to slip into and get stuck for a moment. The unit looked like it was stumbling through an invisible obstacle course. Their perfect synchronization was gone. They moved out of step with each other, each one dealing with its own tiny, annoying problem. "It's working," Taehyun said, his voice tired but proud. "Their network is getting noisy." Jinwoo watched the stumbling unit. He did not feel proud. He felt a deep, primal coldness. They had stopped being colonists. They had become forces of nature. They were the unpredictable wind, the shifting ground, the confusing forest. They had unleashed the planet's own chaos, and they were learning to wield it. The Kel had come to order a world. They were now wrestling with a storm, and the storm was just beginning to grow. The Kel hive mind had never experienced failure. It had consumed 17 worlds. It had ordered chaotic biospheres into perfect, useful silence. It followed a simple logic: find resource, harvest resource, eliminate local disruption. Terra Nova 7 was different. The primary resource, the planet's biomass and minerals, was plentiful. The secondary disruption, the human colony, was weak. Its technology was simple. Its weapons were pointless. The hive mind had calculated a swift, efficient harvest. But the disruption did not behave logically. The hive mind received a flood of data from its units. The data was wrong. It was contradictory. It was illogical. A harvester unit in Sector East 5 reported sudden ground instability. It recommended a route change. But a scout unit in the same sector, sent to verify, reported the ground was perfectly stable. By the time the hive mind reconciled the reports, the harvester had spent 47 minutes motionless, waiting for instructions. 47 minutes of zero efficiency. A disassembler unit at the water filtration plant was slowed by viscous mud. This was a physical problem, understandable. But the cause was illogical. The humans had diverted their own water supply to create the mud. They had damaged their own infrastructure to cause a delay. This was not defense. It was sabotage without purpose. The hive mind's logic loops struggled with an enemy that broke its own tools. Then came the noise. The audio disruptions were the worst. They were not attacks. They were infections. A disassembler unit would hear the hive mind's own coordination frequency. Then the frequency would warp, filled with the shrieks of local fauna or random, loud crashes. The unit's audio sensors were fine. The signal was corrupted at the source. This caused a critical error. For the first time, different units in the same area began receiving slightly different auditory data. Unit A heard the advance command. Unit B, a moment later, heard a distorted command that sounded like hold position. The result was a stutter in the perfect dance. Units bumped into each other. A harvester moved while a disassembler was in its path. It was a tiny collision. No damage was done. But it had never happened before. The hive mind devoted more processing power to understanding the disruption. It categorized the human actions: sonic deception, terrain manipulation, chemical irritation. But the purpose escaped logic. The actions did not halt the harvest. They only slowed it. They only annoyed. It was like trying to understand why a small insect would constantly fly into one's visual sensor. It served no survival purpose. It was just chaos. Deep in the command network, a new type of signal was detected. It was a concentrated burst, aimed not at Kel units, but at the communication nexus itself. It was Taehyun's masterpiece. He had gathered every strange, primal, and human sound he could find. He did not have a military weapon. He had a collection of noises. He combined them into a single, terrible broadcast. The burst began with the Kel's own buzz. Then it fractured into the sound of human laughter. A sound of joy the hive mind had no context for. This was immediately overwritten by the roar of a chemical fire. Then, a single, clear note from a child's music box. Then the scream of a man, Leader Sook's scream, taken from the security feed. Over that, Taehyun layered the crashing of waves, the rumble of an earthquake, and the pure, shrieking static of a broken heart at IT was a storm of emotion and disorder. It was a broadcast of everything the hive mind was not. It was irrational. It was passionate. It was alive in a way that was terrifying to pure, cold order. The burst hit the psychic network. For the Kel units on the ground, the world blinked. A harvester, wrist deep in a tree, froze. Its limbs locked. Its internal systems received a cascade of conflicting commands. Harvest. Cease. Seek threat. Ignore. Self-diagnose. Attack nearest unit. The hive mind, for a fraction of a second, was not one mind. It was a billion minds, each receiving a shattered piece of nonsense. The perfect, silent hum of their connection became a screech of discord. The silence that followed was not the old silence. It was a stunned, broken quiet. The humans, watching from their hiding places, saw the effect. An entire sector of Kel units simply stopped. They stood like black statues under the sun. One unit twitched. Another took a single, jerky step to the side. For no reason. The stoppage lasted for 5 minutes. 5 minutes in a harvest that had known no pause. When the units moved again, they were different. Their movements were slower, more cautious. The hive mind had been forced to isolate and purge the corrupted data packet. It was like a brain fighting off a sudden, violent headache. Could do it, but it took energy. It took focus. And it created something new, suspicion. The hive mind began to see patterns where there were none. A rustle of grass, once ignored, was now scanned for hidden meaning. A trick of the light became a possible ambush. The humans' chaos had done more than slow them down. It had made the perfect, logical mind paranoid. It started to second-guess its own data. It sent scouts back to recheck areas already cleared. It ordered harvesters to avoid terrain that was perfectly safe, just because it could be dangerous. The efficiency rate plummeted. The beautiful, ordered advance became a slow, grinding crawl, filled with constant checks and halts. The hive mind had a new, primary objective. It was no longer simply to harvest. It was to understand and eliminate the chaotic anomaly. But the anomaly had no center. It was in the sound. It was in the mud. It was in the spores. It was in the very air. For the first time in its existence, the Kel hive mind felt the stirrings of an illogical, inefficient impulse. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was the desire for the chaos to simply stop. And the humans, watching the invaders become slow and hesitant, felt a new kind of power. They had not fired a shot. They had not won a battle. But they had given a god of order a migraine. And they were just getting started. The final push of the Kel was not an attack. It was a last, desperate act of order. Their logic concluded that the colony's central fusion reactor was the source of the chaos. It was the largest energy signature left. It must be powering the disruptions. They would take it apart, and the noise would end. Every remaining Kel unit converged on the reactor building. It stood at the heart of Haven, a block of dull metal and humming conduits, now silent without power. To the humans, it was a tombstone. To the Kel, it was the root of the problem. The humans knew they could not defend it. They did not plan to. Instead, they gathered around it. They did not look like soldiers. They looked like what they had become, wild things. Their clothes were stained with mud and soot. Jinwoo's hands were caked in dirt. Myri's hair was tangled with leaves. Taehyun clutched his homemade broadcaster like a sacred object. Sujin stood calmly, a simple hammer in her hand, surveying the reactor's hull not as an engineer, but as a defender of a cliff face. They did not hide. They stood in the open, in a loose circle around the reactor door. They had no weapons that could pierce Kel shells. They only had themselves. From every street and broken avenue, the Kel came. Harvesters, disassemblers, scouts. Their oily black shells reflected the red light of the setting sun. They moved in a wave, a tide of silent, clicking limbs and focused purpose. The psychic buzz was a physical pressure in the air, a wall of singular thought. The humans did not move. The Kel front line reached the edge of the reactor plaza. They slowed. The hive mind was analyzing. Why did the chaos not chaos stand so? It was not a defensive formation. It was not logical. It was another puzzle. Taehyun looked at Jin Woo, who gave a single nod. This was the moment. Taehyun flipped a switch. All around the plaza, from hidden speakers rigged to batteries, his sound broadcast erupted. But it was not the complex mix from before. It was something simpler and far worse. It was the sound of a human heartbeat. Amplified. Lubde-ube. Lubde-ube. Over it, he layered the sound of breathing. Not calm breath, the ragged, fierce breath of someone staring down death. And then, he added the only human sound leader Kim Suk still made. His low, empty hum.it was the sound of being alive, layered over the sound of a mind erased. It was terrifying in its simplicity. The Kel line hesitated. The heartbeat was a rhythm, but an organic, messy one. It did not match their perfect beat. Then, the humans began to move. They did not charge. They did not shout a single war cry. They each made their own sound. Jin Woo let out a deep, wordless roar that came from his gut. Myri screamed, a high, sharp sound of pure defiance. Soo-jin slammed her hammer against a metal pipe, creating a loud, ringing clang. Others cried out. They howled. They beat on broken pieces of their world. They became a cacophony, a storm of individual, passionate, furious noise. Every person was a different instrument, playing a different song of rage and survival. There was no harmony, only beautiful, terrible dissonance. The Kel hive mind was bombarded, could not process 1,000 individual threats. It was built to face one enemy, one pattern. Not this. The frontline units took a step back. The physical recoil, the perfect advance broke. Jin Woo saw it. He saw the hesitation. He picked up a rock not to throw, but to smash against the ground. He ran not at the Kel, but along in front of them, a wild, unpredictable path, scattering more of Myri's dizzying spores from a sack. The hive mind tried to focus on him, to categorize this new motion. But then Soo-jin blew a shrill whistle from the other side, and a prepared cable snapped, dropping a net of debris between two units, separating them. The Kel tried to adapt. They moved to clear the net, but as they did, Taehyun switched the sound again. Now it was the ultrasonic cry of the Jujiok worm, the sound that meant terror to every creature on this world, a sound the planet itself understood. The psychic network flickered. The units stopped again, utterly confused. The heartbeat, the screams, the planetary distress cry. It was too much. It was data that led to no logical action. The hive mind's processing, designed for clean efficiency, was overheating on the poison of pure chaos. The retreat did not start with an order. It started with a single scout unit on the far left flank. Overwhelmed by conflicting sensory and psychic noise, its basic survival protocol, hardwired for self-preservation in the face of incomprehensible danger, triggered, turned and scuttled away. Like a crack in a dam, the action spread. The hive mind, strained to its limit, could not reassert control over the primal flight instinct in a few units. Then a few more broke away. Then a harvester. The orderly retreat became a rout. The Kel did not run in fear. They withdrew with a stiff, rapid urgency. But the meaning was clear. They were not leaving because they were beaten in battle. They were leaving because the environment had become unacceptable. It was toxic to their fundamental nature. The humans were not an enemy to be defeated. They were a sickness in reality itself. The black tide flowed back, away from the reactor, away from the screaming, heart-beating, living chaos of the humans. They moved towards their polar descent points, to their silent seed ships. The humans did not cheer. Their cries died in their throats. They stood, heaving breaths, watching the invaders leave. The silence that returned was not the old silence of order. It was a new silence, worn out and wounded, but alive. Jinwoo dropped his rock. His hands were trembling. He looked at Myri. Tears were cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face, but she was standing tall. Sujin leaned on her hammer, exhausted. Taehyun held his broadcaster to his chest, the speakers finally quiet. Around them, their world was scarred. Trees were gone. Buildings were half dissolved. The land was bruised. But it was theirs. It was not ordered. It was not quiet. It was chaotic and messy and alive. Jinwoo walked over to a patch of torn-up earth. He knelt. He dug his fingers into the soil. There, in the red dirt, he saw a flicker of movement. A tiny, six-legged Jujiok worm, uncurling from its ball. It tested the air with its head, then began to dig, starting its work again. He looked up at the sky, where the last black shapes were disappearing into the stars. They had met humanity's primal fury. Not the fury of weapons, but the fury of a heartbeat that would not be silenced. It was a fury that preferred a messy, singing, living chaos to a clean, quiet, and dead order, and it had won.